I want to start, I guess, by asking or welcoming everyone to our annual meeting. And it's unfortunate, obviously, at this particular time, we end up having to do these virtually because our APM is usually such a great time to get together to share in person just some of the things that are going on around at the airport, our plans for the future, a little bit, obviously, a review of the past year. My name's Barry Rempel. I'm president and CEO of the Winnipeg Airports Authority. If you would like to follow along in French, please feel free. There is an option for translation services just at bottom of the screen there. So please, if that's your preference, follow along there. As well, if you have questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A option. Just submit your question. We'll address them at the end of the presentation. Obviously, you won't be very surprised to hear me say that this past year has truly been a time unlike anything else we've ever experienced. We've had to adapt quickly and frequently to a very difficult environment. We're clearly not done yet, but I want to say that what we have been able to accomplish and how we've been able to sustain our community throughout this couldn't have been done without everyone working together. It was important that we prioritize our public health and safety above all else at the airport. Not just the airport, but I'll say I believe our industry has done a fantastic job of finding ways to make sure that we're keeping everyone safe. We have been incredibly fortunate to have some great partners and stakeholders and some really just fantastic people to work with every day, including many of you that are gathered here today. I'd also like to acknowledge our board of directors. You know, boards of directors are intended to be the rudder on the ship. And there is no more important time than when you're going through a storm to know that that rudder is working. We've got a great board. They are here to steer and set the direction for the airport. And maybe I'll just say on that note, I'd like to welcome the chair of our board, Brita Chell, to provide an update from her perspective. Brita?
Thank you, Barry, and good morning, everyone. I'm Brita Chell, and as Barry noted, I'm chair of WAA's Board of Directors. This is my second year as chair and my sixth year serving the board, and I can clearly say that my first year as board chair is one that's going to go down in the record books. No one could have predicted what we would face in 2020, nor could anyone have forecasted the impact that this would have on our industry. As you will hear today, our community and our operations are not immune to these impacts. This has not been just a singular event, which we are working to recover, but we continue to face challenges, and rebuilding our community's connectivity will be a daunting task. But in working with some incredibly dedicated and community-minded people, I am honored to be leading the board during this important time in our history. The board of the airport is tasked with the responsibility for guiding the company in our environment and providing the strategic direction which ensures our sustainability. The board defines the priorities, and these are the key themes that the team focuses on to achieve success. And by success, I mean positioning the company to address our vision of leading transportation, innovation, and growth. Each of the strategic priorities are fundamental to help us navigate this unprecedented period in our service to our community and setting us for success in the future. WAA has 7 external nominating entities and also nominates members to the board as well as from the community at large. Let me say, they have done a great job. Having a strong board has never been more important. You will see on the screen the list of our board. New to the board this year is Adam Kilfoyle, nominated by the Assiniboine Chamber of Commerce. Adam joins the board in place of outgoing board member Jerry Glatz. Jerry served the board for 9 years, and I would like to once again thank him for his dedication and his contributions. To aid in delivering our mandate, the board has 2 committees, the Audit and Governance Committees. The board operates as a collective, a committee of the whole, making decisions, and the committees make thoughtfully prepared recommendations to the board for the consideration. Outside of the board, WAA has established the Community Consultative Committee to provide a venue for effective dialogue with community leaders from business, tourism, Indigenous communities, and government. And the Environmental Advisory Committee is another way we engage the community, allowing us to discuss environmental issues as they relate to airport operations. During the past year, the board continued its focus on its 3 business priorities: leadership, innovation, and diversification. Each one became increasingly important as our understanding of the pandemic grew. Leadership is about unlocking the potential of the airport and driving our region's social and economic recovery. Building a nimble team and a flexible company structure was critical to successfully navigating 2020. Our focus on innovation similarly served us well as we worked to address shifting demands brought about by the pandemic environment. It brought new requirements for technology and processes such as contactless experiences. The benefit of prioritizing diversification became increasingly apparent as the year and the impacts of the pandemic progressed as well. As overall travel volumes declined, we relied heavily upon our subsidiaries to diversify revenue sources and contribute to our sustainability. Wasco and Airport City Winnipeg played integral roles in generating revenue sources by exploring new partnerships and seizing opportunities to make us more competitive and financially secure over the long term. These priorities guided us during one of the most challenging periods in the history of our industry and will continue to be essential to our recovery. At this time, I would like to thank the entire WAA team for their dedication, resourcefulness, and perseverance. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Nicole Stefaniuk, WAA's Vice President of Finance and Administration. Thank you.
Thanks, Brita, and good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be sharing with you today, not just the numbers, but the story behind what has been the most challenging year ever for WAA. So first, let's start with some good news. In the years leading up to 2020, we had experienced very steady passenger growth, including peak growth levels of 6 to 7% in 2017 and 2018. However, that history dropped off a cliff in March of last year. The emergency measures implemented in order to combat the virus, including travel advisories, border closures, quarantine periods, and wide range public health protection measures, triggered a significant decline in air travel. For Winnipeg, that meant we finished the year at just 1.3 million passengers, a decrease of an incredible 71% over 2019. The last time we saw passenger volumes that low was in 1971. Wow. Now, Canada shifted the costs of providing critical airport infrastructure to users in the mid-1990s. This model means airports are expected to generate revenue from sources directly linked to people flying in and out of the airport. The largest single source of revenue comes from airport improvement fees, or AIF, which is shown at the top of the graph and represents 29% of 2020's revenue compared to 53% in 2019. This revenue is collected from the users of the terminal building by the airline at the time they purchase the ticket. And those revenues are forwarded to us, minus the carrier's administration fee of 7%. And this money is then available to be used for the necessary improvements to critical infrastructure, which ensures our community stays connected. In our case, it specifically covers the debt servicing for the terminal building. The AIF is followed closely by our aeronautical revenue, which includes the airfield and terminal revenue in the graph. This is what the airlines pay to use the airfield for things like landing fees and other services. The one revenue source that has performed well this year is our airport management revenue, which represents the work we do through our subsidiaries to manage other smaller airports and to perform safety management consulting. This revenue stream has increased both in absolute dollars and in its percentage share of total revenue. This reinforces the fact that our efforts to focus on revenue diversification over the last few years was the right choice. The airport also earns leasing revenue mainly in the form of land leases, and this revenue source has remained relatively stable this year. Other significant revenue streams include our groundside revenue, which represents parking and ground transportation fees such as taxis or Ubers, as well as concession revenue, in which we earn a percentage of sales for the airport's restaurants and retail stores. Now, what's key here is that over 85% of our pre-pandemic revenue was directly linked to passenger volumes, the decline in which has had a significant impact on our financial results. On the expense side, personnel costs and services and repairs are the largest cost drivers, which are reflected at the top of the graph. Services and repairs include all the contracted services to operate the airport, so things like security and cleaning costs, while personnel costs is for our employees at the various sites, such as here in Winnipeg and up in Iqaluit. Supplies are also a significant percent of our operating expenses. This includes everything from fuel costs for our mobile equipment, as well as the chemical used on the airfield in the winter. So needless to say, these costs can fluctuate from year to year. Ground lease rent, or you could call it a tax, it's the amount we pay the federal government for the privilege of building and operating our community's airport. This is reflected at the bottom of the graph, and it was our third highest expense pre-pandemic. In 2019, WAA paid the Government of Canada $9.7 million. We were thankful that in 2020, the government provided airports with 10 months of rent relief on the amount that would have been due, even with the dramatically lower passenger numbers, thereby reducing our total cost. Utilities, property tax, insurance make up the rest of our expenses, and we pay property tax to both the City of Winnipeg and the RM of Rawson. The drastic drop in passenger traffic is evident in our results, with revenue dropping by more than 50% over 2019. We did respond to the drop in revenue by cutting our operating costs and right-sizing the terminal. We reduced the footprint in the terminal by approximately 40%. We consolidated operations to the west side of the terminal, and only about half of our gates are in use, and parts of the baggage handling system have been turned off. We've reduced contracted service providers throughout the terminal, so things like the information booth, the ground transportation liaisons, and others. And unfortunately, workforce reductions were also required, with 20% of a nearly 150-person workforce laid off or retired. The nature of a cost structure at an airport is that we have a high percentage of costs that are fixed. So, for example, the cost of labor, fuel, and chemical to keep the runway clear in the winter, it's the same regardless of whether you have one flight or whether you have 10 flights an hour. So as a result, the reduction in operating costs cannot offset the revenue shortfall. EBITDA for the year, or earnings before interest and depreciation, was not sufficient to cover off the debt servicing and depreciation, which resulted in a net loss for the year of $40.3 million. EBITDA is an important metric that we track, and it needs to be maintained at a certain level to help cover principal and interest payments on debt, as well as to generate sufficient cash flow for capital assets. So as you can see in this graph, the trend line for EBITDA as a percentage of revenue is normally fairly consistent. However, in 2020, this percentage dropped, which caused us to deplete some of our cash reserves. Every year, we develop a capital plan to help maintain the airport assets and keep them in good working condition. Historically, our maintenance capital is between about $20 and $25 million a year. Now, the increase you see in 2019 relates to the new revenue-generating ground services equipment building that opened in 2020. But in order to preserve cash, our capital plan for 2020 was actually reduced by almost 90%. And only projects relating to safety or security, such as airfield repairs, or projects that are already in progress, such as the completion of the GSE building, were undertaken. Now, over the years, WA has been prudently managing its resources to ensure that we have sufficient liquidity on hand to cover our debt requirements. You can see here that at the end of 2019, we had $140 million in available cash or credit. However, the shortfall in revenue throughout 2020 has resulted in us liquidating our investment portfolio to help fund operations and to service our debt. Throughout the year, we burned through $34.5 million in cash. And out of an abundance of caution, we also decided to take out an additional subordinated credit facility of $50 million, which increased our total available credit to $126 million. Important metrics used in assuring that we are maintaining our obligations to bondholders are the debt service coverage ratio and the gross debt service coverage ratio. These ratios are used as calculations in our trust agreements. They form the basis of covenants with our bondholders, and we are required to keep them above 1 and 1.25 respectively. So as you can see in the graph, our debt service coverage ratio fell well below the threshold for 2020, and it's not expected to be back in compliance until 2023. As a result, we ended the year by soliciting our bondholders for covenant relief for a 3-year period until passenger traffic starts to recover. We were pleased with the success of our waiver and the support from our bondholders, who voted 96.1% in favor of the amendment. So that concludes my financial summary, and I will now hand over to Barry, who will provide you with a further overview of the year. Thank you.
Really appreciate that, Nicole. I know many of you have heard me reference Simon Sinek and how his book, It Starts With Why. And at WAA, we clearly understand our why. We exist to serve our community by leading that transportation innovation and growth that Brita mentioned. We're here to provide excellent facilities and services, which leverage our assets for you. Serving our community. These 3 words are at the core of every single decision that we make, from the boardroom to interacting with airport guests on the front lines every day. Without question, I will say this commitment looked and felt a little bit different in 2020. You saw from the numbers Nicole just shared, 2020 actually started off on a high note. Candidly, the terminal was a hub of activities. Travelers were, taking off on winter vacations, business trips. We were welcoming visitors on the hug rug every day, multiple times a day at the bottom of that escalator. We had just seen 4.5 million passengers move through the airport. Passenger traffic volumes in January, in fact, exceeded forecasts. The community and the growth provided by that direct connectivity was benefiting from access to 43 nonstop destinations across North America. In fact, our team was actually getting ready to roll out plans for future developments on the campus that would respond to the continued growth in traffic. Yet with that, we had been monitoring some evolving situation over mostly in Asia. And we had actually started to note in January a significant decline of the number of people traveling between Winnipeg and China in particular, and then broader in Asia in February. As we shared in September, our focus then became a plan. It was a plan for something that was still candidly unknown, and it was based on understand, mitigate, and sustain. And the fact that this was not a linear process, but it was an iterative process for control and improvement. Initially, the focus was on understanding what the virus meant for our industry, the potential for impact on our community, and then preparing for disruption. Thanks to early conversations with public health authorities, government bodies, and honestly, other airports around the world, we developed a COVID-19 response plan well before the first case of COVID-19 hit our community. While we felt prepared, I have to say no one could have anticipated the magnitude of the pandemic, the disproportionate impact it would come to have on our industry. Our immediate focus, as I said at the outset, was the protection of travelers, visitors, and employees, and our broader community. It was a particularly poignant moment for me when we recognized the time had come to roll up the hug rug. It was a place which had come to reflect our community's connectivity, but those same values meant we needed to do all possible to minimize the touch encounters, running counter to our desire to provide clean and simple journeys. Physical distancing signage was distributed throughout the terminal. We worked to raise awareness of non-essential travel advisories. In fact, we had signage all over the airport. It was unfortunate that it actually was impeding what would have been the normal flow, but it was necessary. As you can see on the graph, passenger traffic was strong, and Nicole mentioned it, until March. In fact, March 13th, which is when we found ourselves suddenly assisting in the repatriation of citizens returning home from abroad. Borders were closed, airlines reduced services, non-essential travel advisories came into effect. Winnipeg Ricahrdson went from seeing an average of 12,000, if you just take 4.5 million, divide by 365, 12,300, 500 passengers per day to approximately 250 per day. For the good and the bad of it, say I've had the privilege of serving in aviation for many years. I can say that the challenges for the aviation industry are nothing new. We used to have a saying that any year ending in 1 was a bad year. Over the last 30 years, we have seen dips in traffic due to recessions, 9/11. Many of you will remember that. Even the SARS outbreak, which was immediately followed by another financial crisis. Each time, I recall feeling that dip felt like the end of the world was upon us. Yet in retrospect, the impact was actually minimal and the recovery was actually quite quick. This time, we knew we were dealing with something quite different. The drop in 2020 was unlike anything we had seen before. While there were certainly lessons to be learned from those past experiences, we knew we were charting a new course with new challenges. I recall many discussions that we had regarding the potential for, deep V versus U. Some were talking about W. No one actually said K recovery in the early days, but that's now a term we've come to understand. As it progressed, we were left to solve an equation we had never imagined. We never, ever thought we would have to solve an equation when 95% of your revenues, your passengers, disappear, but 85% of your cost remain fixed. And Nicole just mentioned, the cost of cleaning the runways, sweeping snow, those kinds of things, whether you have 1 flight or 100 flights. If I might add, other countries moved quickly to provide their airports with literally billions of dollars in grants. But what do you do when your government doesn't? I'll have a little bit more to say on that in a moment. This photo was taken on our departures level on April the 8th last year. To me, it really captured what the airport looked like for the entire second quarter. It was a time which typically would have been a very busy hour of the day, but when passengers fell, as I said, by 95% over 2019, that's what it looked like. It's a problem when you operate on a user pay model. Your revenue is tied to the number of people using the airport, the users. Even though passenger traffic and revenue fell drastically at that point, the airport needed to continue operating. We still had to provide support for those essential services. We have, nurses coming through. We have people that are essential. I recall one situation of the Western Canada elevator repair person. They all still have to travel in order for us to continue operating as a community. Shutting down your community's connection to the products and services needed to fight the virus was simply not on. We supported cargo flights, the delivery of shipments of PPE, worked with carriers that had rapidly converted passenger airplanes to basically hand load cargo. Many other essential supplies at a time our community needed it most. Medevac services, military operations continued. The search and rescue that certainly 1 Canadian Air Division over on the other side of our airfields requires and supports our community with. Forgotten in all the recent flight shaming is that we were here to support essential travel, helping critical industry workers, healthcare professionals to get where they needed and where they were needed the most. All this to say, the airport supports many services beyond commercial passenger flights, all of which play an extremely important role in helping keep our region supplied and connected during the pandemic. As we established a baseline understanding of the virus and its impact, we then moved to address what were the appropriate ways of mitigating that impact on the airport itself. I said 85% of our costs were fixed. The team had to reimagine the terminal building and to find efficiencies wherever possible. I have to thank them. They did an incredible job. Nicole talked about some of the things, cycling down the lights, turning down thermostats, consolidating operations to just the west side of the airport terminal, powered down any equipment that was not in use. And in fact, equipment that could be used, but alternate better ways of dealing with it were available to us. As Nicole said, we paused on all non-essential capital projects. And while it was a difficult decision to make, a few months later, we moved forward with salary reductions and staff layoffs to provide for the long-term sustainability of the airport and the company. At the same time, we expanded our commitment to provide clean and healthy environment. We needed, as I said, to ensure everyone could feel safe when they were in our facilities. This commitment eventually became known as our YWG Clean program. In fact, it's Airport Council International Healthcare Certified program. Honored to have been part of that program and be so recognized. It represented a continually expanding portfolio of the actions taken since the onset of the pandemic. We thoroughly reviewed and enhanced every cleaning solution, tool, technique, and practice to help us ensure we were meeting the very highest of standards. I got to pause maybe and just thank our cleaning team for continually adapting to the increased protocols and to help protect our airport community. It wasn't a one time and done. It was, here's a new protocol. We've learned something more about, the particular virus and how it's communicated. Here's something else we need to do. That team rotates through the terminal each day, addresses every touch surface in the high traffic areas. And you'll see them if you're in the terminal building. A lot of them are enhanced with what we call enhanced cleaning icons. Well, what we did in 2020 was what we could. The unfortunate reality is that our industry was hit very hard. 2020 just saw 1.3 million passengers through. I'll be surprised if we see that going forward. It was well short of the 4.5 million in 2019. It's worth pointing out that more than 70% of our passenger traffic in 2020 actually came in the first 3 months of the year. We began 2020 with direct service, as I said, to 43 destinations across Canada, United States, Mexico, Caribbean. 10 airlines were helping us connect the community to the world. On a typical day, 63 airplanes would be taking off from YWG in any particular period. By the end of the year, this is what our route map looked like on the right. 14 domestic connections and 1 US destination. All airlines reduced service. United, in fact, left the market entirely. We lost seasonal and year-round connectivity to some really in-demand destinations in the United States, Chicago, Orlando, Las Vegas. At the same time, we lost the direct routes to all the sun destinations. And many of you will recall the stories of people being, caught down south and trying to get home. That was a network that took years for our air service development team to build, working closely with carriers. We were also advised that seasonal service for United Kingdom would not be coming back. While several major routes in Canada remained intact, we saw a drop in frequency. And as you can see on the left, which compares the number of flights per month, March 2019 to March 2021. To break it out even further into, I'll say, a daily perspective, we started off 2020 with 11 flights per day to Toronto, and we ended the year with only 4 flights. Central to our approach has been the steps needed to sustain WAA and YWG for both the short and the long term. I believe we've done what we could to understand and mitigate the impact of the pandemic, but we need help in rebuilding our community's connectivity. We continue to look to the federal government to help airports. Nicole mentioned it. I have to acknowledge the federal government did waive rent for the airport for part of 2020 and 2021. And WA has in fact accessed things like the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy Program. However, all combined, this list left us well short of what is needed or what we have seen in all other countries of the G7. There was positive news for the industry earlier this month, the announcement of Air Canada. And if you've been paying attention even early this morning, a similar model was just announced for Air Transat. It remains unclear if and when any other airlines will receive support. I know WestJet has talked about the competitiveness now of the government having equity in airlines, but not all airlines. And what does that mean? At the end of the day, it is about our competitiveness. And I say our, I'm talking about the industry, not just airports. The ability of business to have access to markets at reasonable cost is fundamental to our future growth and recovery. This minimal aid has left us needing to take actions of our own. We commenced, as Nicole talked about, the bondholder consent process in December of 2020. WA, she said, strong support in the market because bondholders believe in the long-term potential of airports and connecting with their communities. We secured that waiver, short-term relief, another 2 years, but we were also subsequently able to go to the market in February 21 to secure an additional 100 million, a bond providing the liquidity that we will need to sustain the airport and the company. This obviously comes at a cost, and it's a user pay system. It will eventually be borne by the users. Winnipeg is not unique in this. The prognosis for airports across the country, and I'll say aviation across the country, is for a more expensive Canadian aviation industry. That in turn will impact the potential for our region's social and economic recovery. Many have heard me say this: policy matters. Canada is requiring the industry to borrow its way to the future. Those loans need to be paid back. The rest of the G7 has made other policy choices which will ensure the core infrastructure and the people required to support the connectivity is ready and available for social and economic recovery. So what does that look like? For comparison, I'll just say airports south of the border have enjoyed 2 rounds now of very targeted industry-specific financial support in excess now of $20 billion US. There's another round of just infrastructure funding coming. It's on its way. In fact, it was talked about yesterday in the president's message to the country. They have committed to maintaining employment and reducing debt while ensuring the airport infrastructure is built to support a dynamic vision for their future. While US carriers provide $39 fares, our facility costs alone will exceed that. If we want to be competitive, to enjoy the type of recovery already underway elsewhere, our federal government needs to do more. I heard Goldie Hyder yesterday. He's the president of the Canadian Business Council talking to the Assiniboine Chamber. And he was saying, at the early days of the pandemic, it was entirely appropriate. The government had to get up in the helicopter and just shovel cash out. We now need much more targeted and specific because this pandemic is not impacting all industries in the same way. The speed of our recovery will depend on government action. We are asking government to eliminate federal airport rent requirements at least until traffic returns and we're back in a positive cash position. We have to reestablish those cash reserves that were required for our capital programs, just maintaining the airfield prior to the pandemic. It is simply inappropriate for government to expect the dividend from the airport when we're being pushed further and further into debt. We also need government to implement measures which will stimulate air travel when medical evidence says it's safe to do so, while promoting tourism, revitalizing employment in this critical sector. There's an example, just one maybe I'll provide anecdotally. Australia as a country, provided 50% of the airfare for people traveling within the country in the reopening of their economy. The aviation industry has supported government's decision to restrict air travel and to require 14-day quarantine requirements in the early days of the pandemic, especially as at that time we really didn't understand the virus. We didn't understand how it was transmitted or the potential for vaccines, testing, tracing. Our understanding of the virus and testing has evolved, yet we continue to have the same policies in place. In following the evidence and the science, Canada should have uniform requirements from coast to coast, make greater use of testing, and to reduce the federal quarantine requirements. As we look to rebuilding our community's connectivity in ways that mitigate future pandemic risks, the federal government can assist also by modernizing Canada's aviation and trade policies. We have to allow local businesses to take advantage of some of the best trade agreements any country in the world has. Unfortunately, people in Manitoba can't get there from here. We need to have our trade policies and our aviation policies aligned. In the shorter term, we need government to immediately restore the rights for cities like ours to receive transborder flights carrying essential travelers. If it is safe for a Manitoban to arrive in Calgary or Toronto, then it is safe for that Manitoban to arrive here. Just this morning in the Free Press, you saw an article about people who were just simply flying into Grand Forks and driving across the border because of the unique requirements in Canada. These rights for Manitoba, for Winnipeg, were removed unilaterally without even a whisper of consultation. Our airport facilities and hotels have precisely the same processes available as the 4 that are still permitted to receive those passengers. Once it is safe to do so, all cities in Canada need to be reopened and all travelers permitted. Winnipeg has been an international airport dating back to the 1930s. In fact, one of the first of the international airports in Canada. And this connectivity is absolutely essential for us situated in the heart of the continent. Winnipeg has the great blessing of geography. It also has the curse of geography. We can't walk simply to the closest rail station that takes you to the next city. We need aviation for our community to reach what we aspire to. It is simply unfair for government to pick winners and losers based on this policy. Let's be clear. This is a community versus airport sustainability issue. There is no reason our community should be left behind in a way that will make its economic recovery even more difficult than it is for the 4 largest cities. Look, I'm going to leave it to the history books to provide advice on whether, as Canadians, we managed this pandemic well. What I do know is our industry was severely impacted beyond the experience of almost any other. And it is going to take years, not just for us to recover, but for us to help our communities recover. In 2019, operations here in Winnipeg generated $4.3 billion of economic activity. We supported over 18,000 jobs in our community. Put another way, 18,000 families were relying on a thriving airport to put food on the table. Today, a lot of those families are finding it harder to buy the groceries, and it's because of the uncertainty in our industry. Look, some of these jobs are going to come back quickly as soon as we are able to get people moving again. Some are going to take longer, and between technology and fewer people, sadly, others will be gone forever. As I said, policy matters. The decisions today or the indecision are going to have long-term impacts. Left entirely as it is, Winnipeg will continue to see less service as airlines consolidate operations into their hub in order to speed their recovery. Don't blame them. It's the right thing for them to do. It's the wrong thing for our community. As Nicole showed you, we've had to increase our debt to remain solvent and to continue providing the service this community needs. As I said earlier, it comes at a price. Absent sectoral support, our fastest path to recovery is to get people moving again, to get them moving again safely. Vaccinations will be an important part of how we get moving again. Fortunately, vaccination levels are really beginning to climb here and in countries around the world. But we still have a long ways to go to reach what the experts, Dr. Tam mentioned this week, 75% of people she believes are required to have vaccinations before we can start opening up. At the same time, we know we are not able to rely on vaccines alone. Many countries around the globe are not going to have the vaccination levels that we will have in the next coming number of months. We need to continue exploring methods to provide an optimal and a safe environment for travel. It's my belief testing will continue to be part of travel for many years. We as a country need to be ready. Here in Winnipeg, we are working closely with partners to determine the feasibility of a project that will further advance our understanding of the virus transmission, the role of rapid tests and how they can play their part in the future of travel, and how we can mitigate that small risk that travel itself poses. No matter how small the risk, we want to continue to find ways to further mitigate and to keep our community safe. As with people's willingness to get vaccinated, our recovery will depend on whether people have the confidence that travel is safe. We've been doing our part and are continuing to expand upon our efforts to meet the highest possible of standards. It's being noticed, and I'll say being appreciated, at least if you go by social media. And we know this through the positive feedback directly from travelers. The airport today is cleaner than ever. Our commitment to safety remains unchanged. It's our priority to ensure that everyone can feel at home, at ease, most importantly, safe when moving through Winnipeg Ricahrdson International. The combination of vaccines, testing, increased consumer confidence is how our industry will recover. The airlines continue the near impossible task of planning their schedule in this incredibly uncertain environment. You can see it each month. The planned recovery gets put out another month. Our air service team has been working really closely with the carriers to add frequency to this market. As this map shows, there continues to be interest in meeting the demand when the time is right for non-essential travel. Just this past weekend, you saw Winnipeg hosted the return of Swoop. Flair is returning service soon. There is a promise as we look ahead that slowly and gradually our community's connectivity will be restored. Key to WA's success, candidly, is what Brita mentioned in her remarks, building on our strengths and finding ways to continue to diversify our revenues. 2020 showed us the importance of our diverse business model. You saw our revenues were not down anywhere near the level of our passenger traffic. That is in part largely due to our diverse model. We continue looking beyond the airport in Winnipeg to source new revenues and mutually beneficial partnerships. Our subsidiaries, Airport City Winnipeg and Wasco, help in maintaining Winnipeg as a competitive and sustainable airport, meeting our communities and our stakeholders' needs. Wasco leverages aviation resources, expertise, and programs to help other airports thrive all across the country. They do so while also increasing revenue to reinvest in our operations. This revenue was paramount. It made up 19% of WA's total earnings last year, more important than ever when passengers numbers were at the lows that we were seeing. At the same time, the value in Wasco's work is easy to see. Behind each one of Wasco's airport contracts is a community that benefits from having stronger, safer, and a more efficient airport. A couple of exciting milestones in 2020 for Wasco included landing 2 new airport management contracts on opposite ends of the country, Dawson Creek in BC and Stephenville in Newfoundland, Labrador. These contracts solidified Wasco's presence on each coast, and as the subsidiary also oversees management in a couple of other airports, the PA and the one you probably know most of, at Iqaluit International Airport. As you can see here, Wasco has truly grown the company's impact across the country since it was formed. This expansion in a relatively short period of time really shows no signs of slowing at this stage, either, as Wasco has built a strong reputation. And what's interesting is the reputation is for long-lasting, close working relationships with our partners, meeting their needs and adding to long-term value. In fact, our reputation has opened a door to securing Wasco's first contract outside of Canada with Bermuda, it's called Skyport Corporation, who run the airport there. This expansion geographically is welcome news for Wasco, and the team is continuing to explore opportunities in the market for 2021. Another subsidiary I probably should mention is Airport City Winnipeg. Their role is really unlocking the potential of the campus, particularly to support our growing cargo sector. Leveraging our geographic location, our team has been and has seen success in developing our facilities into a leading cargo hub. We talk about being a leading cargo hub for Winnipeg, but it's actually more than that. It's a key component now of Canada's freight network right across the country. Cargo planes are landing and taking off around the clock, delivering essential goods to serve our region. We're seeing cargo volumes continue to steadily climb. To meet that future demand and to help our cargo sector reach its full potential, Airport City Winnipeg is investing in new and in existing infrastructure. At the same time, Nicole mentioned the GSE facility. That was a critical part of relocating tenants and assets in a way that helped us be able to make highest and best use of other land around the airport. That first step was, as Nicole mentioned, a 96,000 square foot building. It's adjacent immediately to the east of the existing terminal building. It allows carriers far more efficient delivery of ground services to the passenger airplanes. A unique feature of the facility helps carriers by removing the need to travel through multiple security checkpoints, saving them obviously a great deal of time, fuel, and offering them a very modern facility that's built specifically for their needs in mind. Simultaneously, as I said, the facility opened up the redevelopment on the southeast side of the airfield for the cargo sector. As a leading cargo hub in the heart of North America, our operations played a major role in protecting our community last year. I mentioned earlier on flights filled with PPE, shipments came from around the world to support our frontline workers. Vaccines started to touch down in December, continue into the new year. E-commerce or online ordering has continued to soar. To further support our critical cargo sector, planning continues on a new multi-tenant air cargo logistics facility. This is a facility that's being built with the help of government, Canadian government, through the National Trade Corridor Fund. Another area where Transport Canada, in this case, has been a really good partner working with us, understanding our financial models, the stages of recovery, so that the shared costs of that are appropriate for the environment we find ourselves in. Despite having adapted throughout what was a very challenging year, seeing air service interrupted to an unparalleled degree, something I just couldn't believe, our commitment to be leaders and an effective community partner has not wavered. We continue to serve our community. I believe we're doing it in ways that go beyond simply the air connectivity for our region. For the 24th consecutive year, our employee-led harvest garden has helped fight hunger in our community. This was of crucial importance for our local food banks, who were seeing a spike in usage in the middle of a pandemic. Since the launch of our harvest garden, we have donated now just shy of 65,000 pounds of vegetables to Harvest Manitoba. We also continue to inspire and to be inspired by the next generation of aviation leaders through things like the presentation of our Aviation Scholarship. And I'll just pause. You see a picture there of Fionn Forbes, last year's recipient. I also want to just note things that go a little bit under the radar. We thank all of our frontline workers, those people who are leading the fight against COVID-19. We had a special water cannon salute. It's an incredible sight for anybody that's involved in aviation. That is a tradition generally only reserved for heroes, and we truly believe they were. While we weren't able to hold an event this year in person, we continued to work with our 220 Air Cadets. they reciprocated, and it was amazing. They shared a very special Remembrance Day video, which we broadcast on November 11th throughout the terminal building. And it was amazing to see guests following the presentation with a moment's silence. Those are the times you remember why we're here. Then, of course, there were some things that were more fun. There was the CAA Summer Drive-In Series. You'll remember seeing that probably in media. It was a series hosted by a longstanding partner of ours, Event Pro. They were on site every day to see it through. It was a great opportunity for us to be involved, and it enabled the community to safely come together and enjoy a night out. Thousands of community members attended and made new and, I hope, long-lasting memories of either a recollection of drive-in theater or new memories of something they'd never experienced before. By staying true to our core values, I'm happy to share WA was named again one of Manitoba's top employers for the 10th year in a row. I think it's the 11th or 12th in total, but the 10th in a row. We also received the inaugural Manitoba Accessibility Award for large business. This achievement is evidence, I believe, of our long-term commitment to supporting employee growth and development, as well as shaping a workplace where each team member can contribute actively to our shared success. I'm extremely proud of our team. I hope you picked that up. Proud of how they've been able to maintain a positive reputation in our community by continuing to drive innovation and to set the standard for best practices across our industry. It's how we ensure WA is ready for the future. I said at the outset, 2020 was unlike any other, and its impact, I feel, will indeed be felt for generations. There is optimism, however. I believe the worst is behind us as vaccines and testing offer that light, a bit of a sun rising on the horizon. This won't be a fast recovery, and there will be turbulence. The entire industry, as I said, has gone further into debt, while our competitors will emerge in stronger financial positions. It will take years to rebuild our roots and to get back to a place where we can think about, I'll say, future growth of certain facilities. But if there's a message I hope you can take from today, it's that WA remains the steady hand on the stick, navigating the crisis as best we are able and living our values in support of our why, you. I want to thank you for joining us today. Our team has been monitoring questions as I've been speaking. And I hope there are some, both leading, some actually I think were submitted prior to today, and obviously monitoring to the presentation. So I think at this moment, I'll ask if they can share any of those questions.
Hi, Barry. There's been no questions that came in, a couple of well wishes, but no questions.
Oh, okay. Well, as always, I want to thank everybody that was on. Really appreciate the opportunity to tell people a little bit about what has been going on last year with this vision of hope for tomorrow. With that, I think I'll turn it back to Brita. It's a wrap. Brita?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Barry. It's definitely been a difficult year, as you've communicated, but there are some bright spots that we're seeing at the end of the tunnel, and we'll keep focusing on those and working towards that recovery. So with that, I'd like to take this opportunity to once again thank everybody for attending today's annual public meeting. We very much appreciate the community's support and the work that we're doing. And with that, this concludes our 2020 annual public meeting. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.